Chapter 1. Hermione Granger stood at the edge of the Burrow grounds, the cool morning breeze playing with her unruly curls. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the Weasley home, which stood in its usual ramshackled position. She had arrived exactly 4 days ago. Although she had been welcomed with open arms, it didn't feel quite the same. A month had passed since Fred Weasley's funeral, where he was laid to rest alongside Remus, Tonks, and many other fallen heroes. Hermione remembered every detail of that day and often relived moments of the war in her nightmares. She hadn't slept well since. After the funeral, Hermione had travelled to Australia to find her parents. It had been an unsuccessful attempt, so she had returned without her parents, who were living in blissful unawareness about their daughter and the wizarding world. Of course, she missed them every day, but Hermione had come to realise that this was just how it had to be from now on. Hermione took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. Her morning walks allowed her to think and to process everything that had happened. And as she walked down the path that led to the Burrow, she thought of Harry and Ron. Ron had been dealing with nightmares as well. He often screamed at night. Sometimes it would be names. Other times, he would beg for forgiveness, or simply beg to die. Hermione tried to comfort him, but she didn't know if her help was enough, or would ever be enough for Ron. Yes, she was his girlfriend, but love couldn't fix everything. Sometimes the heart was just too broken, and the pieces that remained could not stick together. Hermione knew that she loved Ron, but often she would find herself in doubt if he actually loved her. He wasn't affectionate, wasn't very upbeat, and Hermione understood that. It's not easy to lose a brother. She didn't have one herself, but she compared it to losing Harry, which she simply couldn't imagine. And then there was Harry, who was gone and had been gone ever since the funeral. She hadn't seen or heard from him since. Hermione remembered that he looked almost broken at the funeral. His black hair was messier than ever, his emerald eyes were red, and he looked deadly tired and simply miserable. As she neared the Burrow, she saw Ron sitting on the porch, staring into the distance. His red hair was ruffled and his eyes were shadowed with fatigue. He looked up as she approached, managing a small, weary smile. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," Hermione replied, sitting down beside him. The minutes that followed, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise higher in the sky. "Do you think he's okay, Hermione?" Ron finally asked, his voice barely above whisper. Hermione took a deep breath. "I don't know," she admitted. "I hope so, Ron. We have to believe that he's okay. Harry is strong, and I know he'll come back whenever he's ready." Ron nodded, though his eyes remained troubled. "I miss him," he stated simply. "Me too," Hermione replied, taking his hand and squeezing it gently. "But we'll get through this together." I know," he replied. His eyes no longer had the same troubled look to them, and perhaps there was a sign of hope to them. "But I do worry for Ginny. She hasn't been the same ever since he left." That was true. The ever-confident Ginny Weasley had been broken. She tried to cover it up, but everyone knows that she was crushed by Harry's disappearance. "She'll come around, Ron. We just have to give her space," Hermione replied, looking at Ron, who again seemed so lost. "Don't know about that. She has surely changed a lot. And every time I try to get close to her, she pushes me away," Ron explained as he placed his left hand across his face. "I just wish I could do something to help her, to help all of us. I feel so helpless." Hermione nodded, completely understanding Ron's both frustration and sadness with the whole situation. Ron had tried to pull his family together, but George had fled to London. Percy and Mr. Weasley buried themselves in work, and Mrs. Weasley's tears could often be heard through the Burrow's walls, roofs and floors. The door creaked open and Mrs. Weasley stepped out, her eyes the usual red-rimmed from crying. "Good morning, you two," she greeted them, trying to muster them a smile. "Good morning, Mum," Ron replied, his voice subdued. "Morning, Mrs. Weasley," Hermione echoed, giving Mrs. Weasley a sympathetic look. What followed was a long-lasting moment of silence. Hermione didn't know what to say. No one had a clue of what to say, so they all stayed quiet and focused on the sunrise ahead. Hermione wanted to escape this atmosphere. She couldn't help but to feel lost, which for a girl who always had direction and determination was something new. For once in her life, she hadn't thought of the future or focused on the present. All she could think of was the image of all of the corpses scattered around the grounds of Hogwarts. "Who's that guy with Ginny?" Ron said suddenly as he pointed northeast towards the lake. "And is she smiling?" Hermione looked up, and yes, that was indeed Ginny with another guy? Hermione was shocked. She had originally thought Ginny hadn't really left her room, but maybe that wasn't exactly true. Maybe Ginny had snuck out of her room while they all thought she was in there. The young man beside her had long silver hair, his eyes were green, and he had a charming smile upon his face. He looked innocent, yet appearance can deceive and hide away what's really inside of them. Still, there hadn't been a response to either of Ron's questions, but in itself that was a response. Hermione looked at Mrs. Weasley and had a look of worry upon her face, but Hermione could tell she was shocked as well. As Ginny and the young man got closer, she waved at them with a bright and wide smile on her face. She looked like herself, like the old Ginny. "What's up?" she simply said, confident as ever before, like the whole month of sorrow hadn't happened. Ginny, who's that?" Ron simply responded. "Oh, he's my boyfriend," she stated. "Your boyfriend? Since when?" Ron interrogated. "Since now, I guess." She looked at the silver-haired young man and smiled at him. "So that's your lovely mother," the young man finally said. His voice was deep, gentle, and powerful. He took Mrs. Weasley's right hand and placed a kiss upon it. "I'm Lazarus. Lazarus Bane.